When looking for the king of podcasts, you're at the wrong channel.
Well, excuse me!
Looking for good ideas for life? You're far from good hands.
Hey, bud, what's your problem?
If you think the listener is always right, you're far from the right place.
Out of order! Even in the future, nothing works!
Hosted by a Northeasterner by birth, but a rebel by choice.
Are you threatening me?
If you want a host that floats between love and madness,
and we know the night is always gonna be here anyway. Thinking of you's working up my appetite, looking forward to a little afternoon delight.
then play on and listen to Crazy Train Radio.
All right, guys, listen to this blues riff and B. Watch me for the changes and try and keep up, okay?
Within the gaming world, there are your general gamers, but then there are those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming. If you're one of those that enjoy the dark underbelly of gaming, we certainly got the place to send you. Scorpion Lair Games. That's right, Scorpion Lair Games is the creators of the true crime hit Killers, the card game. Let's not forget they also have Killers Clothing Company, the profiler game, and things like the 5-Minute Murder channel on YouTube. And we certainly can't forget the new book that is certainly a hit, beyond the headliners, True Crimes, Myths, and Legends. Make sure you visit Jeff and the Scorpion Lair Games on Facebook and everywhere today.
Hi, I'm Alan Siegel from The Ringer, and you're listening to Crazy Train Radio.
Hey folks, it's your least favorite host in the podcast world, Croc, Jonathan Steele. And boy, do we have a good one for you today.
In the 1990s, there was truly few more proactive and totally outrageous shows on TV, like the show we're going to talk about now, being The Simpsons. Well, this next guest, with his new book, Stupid TV, Be More Funny, How the Golden Era of The Simpsons Changed Television and America Forever. Boy, is that ironic and a great title. But this book traces those heavily hardy years from in the writer's room and beyond. Let's go ahead and welcome the author of this book, Alan Siegel from The Ringer.
Woohoo!
Excellent.
Alan, how are you? And congratulations on the book.
I'm great. Thank you for having me. Whenever someone reads the title to me of my book, I'm still shocked that my editors and publisher allowed me to do it. So the big attaboys to them for for not minding my kind of zany title, which is a Homer quote. But
So we'll start there, with the publishing of the book. It came out last year and such. But How did you go ahead and put this proposal together, but it not selling right away?
Yeah, so I had wanted to write a book about The Simpsons for a long time. I, started as a fan when I was 7 years old, but I couldn't quite think of the right angle to write about the show. It's just so huge. It's gone on now for 35 years or more. So it took me a long time. And after a while, I realized that what people want to read about, and I think I've been validated on that, is they want to read about the golden age of the show, and that's sort of the first 8 to 10 years. And I was like, it's a perfect time frame to focus on because it's basically the 90s. It's 1989 to like 1997, 98. So it's really like a tidy time frame to stick with, and that I think is what helped me sell it.
Right on. So, was there a certain point that they finally said, as you changed your pitch, okay, this is it, let's run with it?
Yeah, it was. Let's see, man, it's been 4 years, but I had some pitches, and my original editor, he really just pinpointed that one. He's like, this is it. And I mean, I think we're sort of at peak 1990s nostalgia. So I just turned 43. It's like right in my wheelhouse of my childhood. People are loving like reliving moments like that. There's a Seinfeld book that's like sort of similar. So that's what did it.
Right on. So, obviously, as the show is rolling on, and in this particular book, you focus on the early era being of that writer's room, which is now discussed as like a mythological room of everything. And you had folks in there such as Conan O'Brien, and you talk about the monorail episode, and everything wasn't as romantic as far as being a place to work. So,
TV sucks.
what was it about that writer's room and the creative process that really stuck to you?
Yeah, so Conan O'Brien, when I spoke to him, had a really funny quote that I'll always remember. And just to paraphrase, basically he said people ask him about the creative process, sort of like looking for these magic moments to describe how they created something like The Simpsons. And he basically was like, it's 12 to 15-hour days. It's a lot of fried food. It's just sitting there, coming in on the weekends. And the romantic part of it is years later, like when you're talking about what you created. And I think what made that writer's room so great, beyond the simple talent of it, was that they were there forever and they were in close quarters. It was just like the grossest dorm room in the world. So they were sitting around in a circle, just like trying to get these jokes. And also, it's very collaborative. So like on Saturday Night Live, if you were a writer or a performer, you had to sort of fight to get your ideas on the air. But at The Simpsons, the best joke always won the day. So every script was gone, rather sort of poured over, like people sort of described it as like mowing the lawn. Like you have to be very meticulous. You go over every little corner of the lawn and you rewrite and you rewrite and you rewrite until some of these episodes are perfect. So yeah.
Now, while we're on the writer's room at least, and when you think about it, I guess this might be 2026 eyes on it, etc. But the writer's room wasn't a diverse group, but yet it still had influence with the tone and the voice of the show. And a lot of these folks were highly educated, like a Conan and such, from Ivy League schools and stuff. So how were they able to still have that influence and voice?
I think people sort of describe Simpsons writers and sort of Harvard comedy writers, and that was the vast majority of these writers, is like people who could have been doctors and lawyers and nuclear physicists, but they decided to write comedy. And so all of them together, they were a bunch of like wonky, nerdy dudes. And so they had varying interests. They, you sort of talk about the influence. Their sort of frame of reference in life was so broad and so specific at the same time. So they watched every TV show from like the 60s to the 80s. They were historians. They loved movies. And they were clever. So you throw all this together and you get like, even though they're a bunch of white guys, like you sort of mush all this stuff together, and what comes out the other side is like transcendent and even bigger than all their, like it's greater than the sum of their parts. So yeah, like they had some blind spots at the time, but I think the show was so good that it kind of transcended any sort of myopia of the View.
Well, obviously, when we're talking The Simpsons and everything else, everything, I would go with and I'm not, this doesn't state my political beliefs, folks, but I think of the trickle down theory from Reaganomics, and everything starts from the top to filters down to make the creative process. So obviously, when I say that, it starts with guys like Matt Groening and Sam Simon, the two guys who were apex of The Simpsons and coming from the Tracy Ullman show and stuff. So with Matt and Sam, what was it about them that started the idea? And if you want to bring up the Tracy Ullman show, and obviously everything filters down the writing crews and animation, just everything. What was it? Could this show have been different if it was developed by somebody else, not Sam and Matt?
I think so. And it was really like three guys. It was Sam Simon, who was a longtime TV producer who, everyone revered. Everyone who worked for him talked about him like he was a god. And basically, from what I've been told, he just was so good at TV. Like from his 20s, he was running shows like Taxi and he worked on Cheers, right? So he knew how to build a sitcom in traditional ways, but also he was sort of jaded by the business of TV. So he was like, we're going to try different stuff every week. We're going to go really creative. We're going to, his line was 13 episodes and out. He thought they were going to do 13 episodes of The Simpsons and be done. Like he didn't think it would work. So that sort of allowed the show to kind of get really creative. So you had Sam, you had Matt Groening, who is the creator of the characters, creator of Springfield, creator of that world. He just was like an indie cartoonist who had a really great imagination. And, without him, you don't have the characters, right? So The Simpsons started as a bunch of shorts on the Tracy Ullman show. They needed ways to have interstitials between the sketches because Tracy Ullman was a really brilliant like sketch comedian who would do these different characters, but the sketches were really sort of unrelated. Like they didn't really connect together. So they needed something in the middle, like as bumpers to split them. And that's where the Simpsons shorts came in. And James L. Brooks is this amazing Hollywood producer, legendary guy, had made Oscar-winning movies, and he sort of had carte blanche to do whatever the hell he wanted. So the idea came up for The Simpsons to be these shorts, and he loved it. And also, like, he later realized, like, this would make for an extended TV show, a real TV series. And, James L. Brooks was sort of known as the show's heart. When, like, The Simpsons got a little too zany, he was always sort of bringing it down to earth. He wanted it to be a real family, kind of like a reflection of his own comedy. Again, movies like Terms of Endearment or Broadcast News, like, again, funny but bittersweet and sort of really focused on the family. And those three guys, Simon, Brooks, and Groening, like, without them together, the show doesn't work.
So, obviously, when we're thinking about putting this stuff together in a blender, let's say, and obviously there's still elements of all of it, even to this day. You got the anti-authority character like a Bart Simpson.
I'm Bart Simpson. Who the hell are you?
You have Homer kind of hodgepodge, like a Jackie Gleason or an Archie Bunker.
I gotta go. My damn wiener kids are listening.
You have influences, say, I don't know if it was an influence, but it seems like it, at least watching the show. A Mr. Burns, like a Mr. Spacely from the Jetsons. So, you get these different influences built into the show. Then, but also, I think it needs to be said, without something like The Simpsons, we don't see, as animation evolves, things like King of the Hill, Family Guy, South Park, etc. So what was it about blending all this together that I mentioned to create a great show?
So I think, especially in its prime, The Simpsons was the best family sitcom on TV. It was, better and more realistic than the Cosbys, right? But also, something that has been talked about a lot is like they were not afraid to break rules, right? So yeah, it was grounded, and that was a big part of the show. But also, they wanted to do things like Treehouse of Horror. So it was like, if anybody who hasn't seen it, it's like a horror anthology, and one of them in the first Treehouse of Horror, one of the segments is The Raven, the Edgar Allan Poe poem. Like, it was a real adaptation. It was not like a paraphrased poem. It was written in the language of the 19th century. So, like, they were not afraid to do things that might alienate the audience, but really it did the opposite. It hooked them. Like, they had Homer, like, jump Springfield Gorge on a skateboard, right? So the point there is you couldn't do that on live action TV. You couldn't do that on Seinfeld. So they had the grounding of a real good family sitcom, and also just like freedom to do whatever the heck they wanted, right? So they could do things that they couldn't do on live action TV. And if you put those two together, one of the writers told me, it's like the first rule of TV is give people what they want. But if you give people something that they don't know that they wanted, they'll be with you forever. And I think that that's like a rule with The Simpsons.
Well, especially early on, there seemed to be, because I'm in the same age range as you, so I grew up watching The Simpsons and then the other stuff mentioned. But there was a lot of pushback at those early years of The Simpsons before it became the legendary show it is. And it was actually referenced in for example, the 92 presidential election. So why do you think there was pushback early on because this was so different compared to other even cartoons or shows in general that we saw?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels so quaint right now. Just like comedy had, like if you watch South Park and then you watch The Simpsons, it just feels like The Simpsons is so quaint compared to something like South Park or Family Guy. But I think at the time, Bart was sort of the focus of the show in the first couple of years. And so he really was like transgressive for the era. Like there weren't little kids on TV talking back to their parents or teachers or swearing or just like kind of doing their own thing. And that scared a lot of adults. Like it scared my parents at the beginning. They initially were like, we can't watch this. It's too adult. And that lasted about 3 weeks. But there was something very dangerous to adults about the show, and also just like from a bigger perspective, like this was not a perfect family, but I think a lot of adults didn't realize that like the show was moral. Like they went to church every week. At the end of every episode, they were together. They were not like the fights didn't last. It was basically a real family, but also one that had like pretty serious family values.
And across TV at that time, especially early on, we have things like The Cosby Show and Alf that have morals. But then on the other side, on a neighboring time slot, let's say on Fox, you have Married with Children. So how long would you say with this era of TV did it take for the show to become a hit?
I mean, it was a hit almost instantly. I think it was probably like the show premiered in 1989 with a Christmas special, and the critics got it right away, which doesn't necessarily mean that there's a big ratings. But a couple weeks go by, and the first episode that's not a Christmas episode airs, and it's almost instant. Like millions upon millions of people are watching. So you have that as a big hit. It's like the merchandise craze. People are buying the T-shirts. And there's like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade balloon by that next Thanksgiving. But I'd say like 2 to 3 years, and you have it as a hit, and then people start realizing that, oh, this isn't just a flash in the pan thing that like kids love. It's really the smartest show on TV. And again, I think it took a little while for it to be accepted as something that's not just sort of dangerous or transgressive.
Well, can you talk about that? You just mentioned it, which I think is a key part of it, and the merchandising at the time. And because you still had it early on and you had this push of merchandise, in that first couple of years. Because I don't think people would think about it nowadays, but the merchandise some of it was banned in schools and stuff like that. So what was the big thing about merchandising you learned recently?
Yeah, so just to give everybody a picture of how big this was, I believe in the first year of the show alone, they sold 15 million T-shirts. So that's a good sort of stat to show how big this was. Like if you go to a flea market in any town in America, they will have Simpsons shirts. And I think that's because they made so many of them. But one of those designs was a Bart Simpson underachiever and proud of it T-shirt. And that was a big deal. Like principals at schools were like, you can't wear this. They started banning it. And I think, little kids don't understand irony, right? Like it's supposed to be a joke. It's supposed to be like Bart's too young to understand why he's proud of this. And so I don't know. It's like my parents never let me wear that one, and I don't blame them. Like it's not something that a little kid should be proud of, but it was sort of the spirit of the show that like they didn't care about sticking with sort of norms of like what entertainment that kids like should be. And, the merch was supposed to reflect the show, and that's how it was. I mean, there were sort of normal Bart and Simpsons shirts that didn't have like inappropriate slogans, but again, this was like a major news story. So it just shows how big the show, like 30 million people were watching episodes of the show at the time. And that would be like the biggest show on TV now.
Absolutely. So would you say, I think you mentioned this earlier, would you say that first 10 years was really the best years of The Simpsons?
Yeah. So I would say it's from like the overall peak, I would say, is like season 1 to season 9 or 10. Some people kind of quibble with that because there's like a lot of obsessive fans. I think like the peak of the peak would probably be like season 2.5 to, I don't know, season 8. But it's funny because I think the show is honestly still good. It's just sort of been a victim of its own success. So it was so good at the beginning that anything after that peak period just kind of pales in comparison, which is not anyone's fault, but that's how good it was at the beginning.
Well, and we were kind of talking about it with the cultural aspect of things with the writer's room, but I know it's been a discussion the past few years, but Abu not really being used and such, do you think because of the, let's say, change in a culture and, like certain characters you won't see now? What's your thoughts on something like that?
When I first arrived, you were all such jerks, but now I've come to love your quirks.
Yeah, I mean, Apu is an interesting example because I can sort of see it from both ways. Like Hank Azaria, who voiced Apu, sort of talked about that, that his voice was sort of based on like Peter Sellers doing like a brownface character back in the 60s. So, and the ideas of like representation and stuff like that were not in the water in the 90s. But also, that character was like one of the smartest characters in the show, like one of the most sympathetic, one of the most hardworking. So it's not, I think both things can be true. Like Apu was a stereotype. He was a convenience store owner, but also like a very well-rounded character in a lot of ways. I don't know if like the decision to sort of sideline him was a good one. I think it was sort of the time. And I think the writers now, like, they can understand it from both sides. Like they get that this is a controversial thing. And yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to see him come back at some point. I just don't know that now is the time for it.
Do you think eventually he will? Because I keep it simple. And like you said, I get both sides of the argument. But this is just a character in a cartoon animation show, and making it bigger than what it may be in some aspects.
Yeah, I don't know. It would be interesting to see him come back. At this point I don't think it'll happen. That's my guess, but I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, that's probably bigger than both of our pay grades. That's for sure.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
So you started watching the show at what, 7 years old? So
yeah,
and I know this reference will probably be dating me as well, but there was a time period early on that you might have been writing on message boards. So what kind of things were you writing about early on in the 90s there?
Yeah, so it's funny because, again, it's sort of inarguable that the first, 5-10 years of The Simpsons is incredible. It's the best. But there were message boards in those days in the early 90s, like sort of pre-World Wide Web. This was something called Usenet, which is basically like a series of message boards. People were like on these message boards saying that The Simpsons was going in the toilet. And this was like 1992.
How'd that work out?
Yeah, it was, exactly. And it was a very, very telling because it sort of showed that, people talk about the internet like it's a cesspool, right? And it is in a lot of levels. But at the same time, it's probably always been like that. And I think like when you have like this hive mind, this place where anyone can go on and say whatever they want, like you're going to get some really ugly stuff. And of course it, metastasized into something even worse, but it is just an example of you put people anonymously into a room together and like they're going to say some dumb things. And in the Simpsons, writers were so smart and sort of egg-headed. Those are the kinds of people that used the internet back in the 90s. They were early adopters of this technology. So they would sort of follow along, and it was kind of quaint for them for a while that like they liked having this interaction with the fans, but it got really toxic. Like one of the writers told me like people would call his office and try to like, talk smack about the episodes. And eventually he had to like yank the modem cord out of the wall. And it's just an example of like feedback is only a gift for so long.
And I don't know this, so correct me if I'm wrong, please. Are you a father? And what kind of, would you introduce things like South Park, Simpsons, all that stuff at a certain point, or would you try to hold off maybe like what your parents tried to do?
So I don't have kids, but I do have nieces and nephews, and they're about the age where they should. I say they should. That's like I'm indoctrinating them, but like that it would be good for them to watch. I think what was so good about the show is, I don't know that like a 4-year-old should be watching, but so much of the adult humor went over my head when I was a kid. So I was fine watching it at 7, 8, 9 years old. I really, really started loving it, like getting it when I was 12, 13, 14. So honestly, I think it's okay for a kid in late elementary school to watch. And again, it's up to parents, right? They can sort of screen the episodes and see what's appropriate and what's not. And the good thing or interesting thing that all the episodes are on Disney Plus. So kids are discovering it now in ways that like I couldn't have. Like if I missed episodes as a kid, it was, unless someone had it on VHS, I couldn't watch. Like I had to wait for reruns. But now, one click of the button and you can watch one of, 850 episodes, which is just a different thing than it was 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago.
Absolutely. And I got Disney Plus just for it. But the book moves at a brisk pace, which is nice. So we'll do the selling point here. What about this book do you think people would really be intrigued with if they are just hearing about it at this point?
Yeah, so two things. I think, the writers of the show have been sort of mythologized, as you said earlier. But I think their perspective to me is just like, you talk to these people, they are so funny. Everything they say is smart and funny. And just hearing from them is worth the read, I think. And also, I think now, again, that the show has sort of become like an icon or an American institution, people just don't realize how controversial it was. And I really enjoyed getting into that part of it because, again, now it's like, The Simpsons are on U.S. postage stamps. Like, this is not something that's dangerous anymore. But I loved going back, sort of telling people and showing people like how different it was 30 years ago. It's like a different climate for comedy, for TV. And so I think people would enjoy sort of reliving that time where the show was like public enemy number one to a lot of people.
And I certainly remember that. But my folks were kind of cool and let me watch stuff like that. So
it took a while, but mine were too. Like they eventually came around. I just think they didn't know what it was, and then they got into it.
And fear. There's a quote about the fear of the unknown and all that. But you are, for your day job, you actually work for the Ringer. So what do you tend to focus on over at the Ringer?
Yeah, like I would say the book is essentially like a blown up version of my day-to-day work. I do a lot of like retrospectives on pop culture, and I cover movies and TV and music. So I wrote a bunch of Simpsons stories for the Ringer before I wrote the book. Like I wrote about, the Hank Scorpio character, how he sort of was like a proto billionaire, right? And if you read that story now, it came out 10 years ago, it'll remind you of a lot of people who are in the news now. And I did a profile of Yardley Smith, who, plays Lisa, and that kind of was great. I got to talk to her and I incorporated some of that stuff in the book. So, and I do these oral histories of movies. And so just an example, I did one on Creed, the, Ryan Coogler and Michael B. Jordan Creed. So that's the kind of stuff I do.
Right on. So where's the best spot people can find you? Obviously, I'm going to put links to X and IG out there, but
yeah. So I'm at Alan Siegel LA. That's my handle on Twitter or X. And also you can buy the book really anywhere books are sold online. If you just Google it, any of the booksellers that you like. And yeah, I appreciate it.
Alan, thank you so much for the time. I appreciate it, my friend.
Thanks for having me, man.
Hey folks, looking for the ultimate destination for the nerd enthusiasts and collectors? Well, we found the spot for you. Nerds Nest Collectibles is a haven for nerds, geeks, and fans alike, as they have many different products and certainly more to come. Make sure you go ahead and visit them at nerdsnestcollectibles.com. Check them out.
Hi, I'm Beverly Randolph, and please listen to Crazy Train Radio.